They're like, oh yeah, guy with Pensy steam comes in every once in a while. They're not really much. Really test LED in the headlight, but we'll take this.
Known quite well by all. She's the regular combination. She's a Wabash cannonball.
Proceed to 15. Hey everybody, this is Pensy Joe back again for another Train Talks video, and today we're going to do another top 5 video, and this time we're going to be doing a top 5 locomotives, specifically steam locomotives, that Broadway Limited Imports should make in their regular line or die-cast line. This is going to be interesting. There's going to be multiple of these going on further down the road. And the reason why is there's so many steam engines that Broadway can make. And I did some quick research on models I believe would be pretty popular and pretty interesting, considering, you know, how popular they were in the brass market. But not only that, I believe there's also some historical reasons why some of these models should be produced, and some trend reasons why, in terms of certain locomotives being that Broadway's making right now, and what tends to be, you know, on their track record of what they're making. So without further ado, we will start this top 5 list, and we'll see some of the interesting locomotives I picked out for this top 5 that BLI should make. Number 5 is going to be the Great Northern 08-282 Mikado class locomotive. Now, this locomotive, you might think, well, this looks like the K2 CNO locomotive that Broadway's going to make as a brass hybrid. And while that is true, take a look at the firebox. That is a Bell Pair firebox right there. And there's a Vanderbilt tender behind that that's an oil burner as well. So when you look at that, you might think, well, Broadway has not made anything like that before. And no, I know that Broadway makes the ATSF 282, the PRL 282, and now the K2 CNO locomotive. And I really think that another Great Northern locomotive would be really great for Broadway Limited's lineup, especially how unique this locomotive is. Yes, you have the water pumps in the front, and the firebox, and the Vandy, but it's all in one locomotive. There are a couple brass locomotive manufacturers out there that have made this locomotive. For example, we have Sunset Models over here with their 08, and look at that paint scheme. That would be so amazing to have in ready-to-roll fashion for Great Northern modelers and steam modelers on top of that. If you look at the locomotive, look how big that firebox is sitting on top of that trailing truck bogie under the, you know, the firebox right there that's supporting all that weight, including the cab. It's a very unique and interesting class of 282 right here. And this is a closed cab. So it'll be really interesting for Broadway to make this kind of locomotive and do it for, you know, die-cast or plastic locomotives in their regular line. It doesn't have too many details for it to be overcomplicated and needing to be brass hybrid or anything like that. So that's why I ranked this number 5, the 08. For number 4, we have the Reading Railroad N1 2880. Now, the reason why I chose this locomotive compared to any other locomotive that Broadway can make is because we really need another Reading locomotive, and I really think that another articulated that's not a big boy Class A Northwark and Western locomotive, or, you know, the usual articulated locomotives out there, would be nice, something different. And I really think this Reading locomotive would be really cool. As you could see from this photo taken back in the old days, you could see a lot of piping detail and some air pumps on the side of the boiler, and the bell is actually offset, and I think that gives it a unique look and a unique wheel arrangement as well to be added, as well as the cab being of a European/English look. And as we look at the brass model over here by NJCB, this is definitely an earlier version that they modeled after for the Reading Line's N1 class locomotive. And I really think that this would be a really unique and interesting locomotive that could be made in a die-cast or plastic line for, you know, the regular line locomotives that they make for steam. It's not too overly complicated. That firebox is huge. The cab is unique, and I like the cab window. And the wheel arrangement is also unique. And the locomotive, it just gives this different kind of vibe. This is a mountain locomotive, and this locomotive was designed to haul coal. Pretty much what the Reading Railroad was mainly doing at the time when these monsters were around. And it's a shame that, not a lot of Reading stuff is out there. They really have some really unique locomotives out there, such as this N1. Number 3 is the Great Northern H7 462 Pacific. So this locomotive has survived and is preserved in real life. The H7 was the Great Northern's premier passenger locomotive for a very long time. What's unique about it is, obviously, if you see that firebox, that's a Bell Pair firebox. One of the only other Pacifics in the United States, or Pacific class series, that had a Bell Pair firebox compared to the Pennsylvania Railroad's K4 class and K series overall. Obviously, the main difference is it's an oil burner, and this looks more like a light Pacific than a heavy Pacific, but it's probably a heavy Pacific. I really think this will be a really interesting locomotive, and yes, this is another Great Northern locomotive on the list, but I really think Great Northern has some really interesting and popular locomotives that could be looked at. I mean, here's that paint scheme yet again with that nice green and that really cool Great Northern logo with looks like the mountain goat on the side right there of the tender. Yes, it's an oil burner, and yes, it's a Vandy tender, but look, it's basically like the K4, but not as chunky. Has a Vandy tender, still has a Bell Pair firebox with a different paint scheme. Though, I really think that making like a K4, being, a fantasy scheme would be kind of stupid. And same with the, doing a USRA Heavy Pacific would do this disservice. The H7 really deserves recognition and a model to be made by Broadway Limited, since it has survived in real life. Coming out for number 2, we have the Reading Railroad G3 462 Pacific. So, what did you expect? Yes, another Pacific class locomotive. However, this is a Reading locomotive. Yes, I want to see more Reading locomotives produced by Broadway because they're very unique. Yes, they're not the most pretty locomotives out there, but they are definitely unique and definitely important for railroading history. The G3 is pretty much a passenger locomotive that preceded the Reading T1s, the 484s, that came out later on. And for the longest time, they've pretty much been one of the hardest workhorses on the Reading Railroad's passenger division. There's also a streamlined version, although it could be an earlier G series, that was the Crusader. It really is one of those interesting models that should be produced by Broadway and not be one of those, typical USRA locomotives. And here we got an example of a brass model right here, and as you can see, it is very beautiful. Pretty much based off of the English design locomotives. It really has that unique look, and it would be pretty cool to have another passenger locomotive of the Reading Railroad. And basically, it looks like a baby Reading T1, except with bigger driver wheels. It's just really an immaculate locomotive, and I think it also deserves to be one of those models that Broadway should produce because of how important it was for the Reading Railroad. And really, another Reading model on top of that. There's only one Reading Railroad locomotive, and that is the Reading T1 484. The G3 is definitely one of those really interesting models that, again, I really believe Broadway should make. This honorable mention goes out to the ATSF 210-4-5011 class steam locomotive. Now, I know a lot of you are probably wondering, why isn't this number 1? Well, to be honest, there are a good amount of ATSF locomotives already out there built by Broadway Limited Imports. Now, granted, I personally also feel that the 5011 class 210-4 should be produced by Broadway Limited Imports at some point. Another 210-4 wouldn't hurt, to be honest with you guys. And while I really think it should be produced, there's really one other locomotive out there that should be produced next by Broadway Limited Imports in their regular line, whether it's die-cast or plastic. Now, don't get me wrong, the 5011 class ATSF locomotive is very important and very, very well known in the railroading community, especially for Pennsy fans. If you're a Pennsy fan and you don't know about the 5011 class, what are you doing? Get some reading, And the reason why is because the 5011 class, as shown here as a brass model example by Hallmark, these locomotives were pretty much given to the Pennsylvania Railroad to borrow near the end of steam for extra lifting work. And these locomotives were pretty powerful and did a really, really good job. And a lot of crews on the Pennsy had nice things to say about these locomotives. I mean, these things were just no joke. They do look similar to the 484 passenger locomotives, which had many classes in themselves, and I'm not going to remember them all. But it's definitely a locomotive that is to be an honorable mention for this list. Number 1 is the Pennsylvania Railroad G5 460. It's quite obvious, guys. The G5, the Pennsylvania Railroad G5. I wouldn't be Pensy Joe and have this channel if I didn't do Pensy. Well, if I didn't do Pensy or loved Pensy, I'd probably love another railroad. Maybe do videos still. Anyways, the G5 is famous on the Pensy. Pretty much most steam engines on the Pennsy are famous. Pretty much almost a lot of brass companies have made almost every Pennsy model that has existed. Probably except the earlier Pennsy locomotives from the 1800s era, but there are probably still some out there you can find that are early era Pennsy locomotives. But yeah, the G5 is iconic. It's been used on a Long Island Railroad, Pennsylvania, and I believe another short line if I'm not mistaken. Here's a good example right here of a G5. I'm not 100% sure which one this is. There's many brass manufacturers out there that have made the G5. It is really just one of those unique locomotives that Broadway really needs to make as a die cast or plastic hybrid, or I would say do both in a plastic. You can use as the deck, side deck rails or something to be thinner instead of, die cast like the E6. And another reason is we don't have a 460 yet. We don't have a 10-wheeler. And I really think the G5 would be the perfect first candidate of a modern late model steam engine that Broadway tends to do, in this size. A 460 would be perfect to be the G5 Pennsylvania Railroad prototype. So that's my number 1, guys, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Bye now.
Hear the lonesome hobo squall, riding through the jungle on the Wabash Cannonball. Well, the eastern states are dandy, so the western people say. St. Louis to Chicago, Rock Island by the way. From the hills of Minnesota, where the rippling waters fall, no chances can be taken on the Wabash Cannonball. Oh, listen to the jingle, the rumble and the roar, as she glides along the woodland to the hill and by the shore. Hear the mighty rush of the engine, hear the lonesome hobo squall, riding through the jungle on the Wabash Cannonball. Now here's to Daddy Claxton, may his name forever stand, and may he be remembered in the courts throughout the land. When his earthly race is over, let the curtains round him fall. We'll carry him home to victory on the Wabash Cannonball. Oh, listen to the jingle, the rumble and the roar, as she glides along the woodland through the hill and by the shore. Hear the mighty rush of the engine, hear the lonesome hobo squall, riding through the jungle on the